now it's spatial computing, like version 4.0.
It does seem to be a sort of new version of it with some of the products that have come out maybe last year and this year. You're wearing your Meta glasses.
They're learning the storyboarding, they're learning storytelling, they're learning user experience design, because you're designing the experience that a person's going to have. That they really think about crafting what I want Joe to feel, what I want him to see, and what I want him to do after the experience. And I think teaching students that, you're not just drawing a picture on paper or turning it in, your teacher's going to give you an A based on some criteria. No, they're crafting experiences for people to go through. I think that'll be a change in how we I think the real effect of spatial computing is going to hit when we start looking at the relationships that people can have and the stories that people can be a part of.
One of the things that I love now about my Apple Vision Pro is that little knob where, yes, I can be interacting with the world around me and I can see the room, but then I spin this little knob on the top right and it all goes away and I'm in a completely virtual world.
So mixed is where you can actually interact with virtual objects in the real world.
The other day when you and I were in a virtual space together with our Apple personas, and I could see that you were looking at me. Like I could see your face would turn one direction or another, but you were looking at me and I was looking at you, and I can see your facial expressions virtually, but it's not a video. It's actually our personas. So I think there is something that is truly real that's starting to happen when people are in virtual spaces together. All right, here we are, Dr. Maxwell. Good to see you. I'm Joe Fambro, and today we're discussing something really interesting, something that some people perceive as being the future, but many of us know that it's here now: spatial computing and virtual reality. Dr. Maxwell, how are you today?
I think it's really interesting that spatial computing is the new word for it, right? We've been using, it was AR, augmented reality, then mixed reality, and then virtual reality, and now it's spatial computing, like version 4.0. But let's hope that this new branding kind of can help launch this good idea for education.
It does seem to be a sort of new version of it with some of the products that have come out maybe last year and this year. You're wearing your Meta glasses. We both have an Apple Vision Pro. But take me back, like virtual reality, augmented reality. What's your thinking on the use of the word mixed reality or XR? What is that? And
I think that, we both were Google Glass yeah, you forgot that one, yeah. Users and wearers, and I still love my glass. I still think that was excellent device. But yeah, mixed reality, I think, was born out of that middle ground where you were trying to, augmented, you can't really interact with it. A virtual, you couldn't interact with the world. So mixed is where you can actually interact with virtual objects in the real world. And I think that's a really good middle ground. I think the HoloLens, Microsoft was a big proponent of that with their HoloLens 1 and HoloLens 2. Just having, and, Google Glass as well, you could put little, actually, I don't remember. It's been a while. I don't think you could do mix with, you could, it was just mostly augmented with glass. But the idea of being able to I think I'd give it to Microsoft on this one, the idea of having the ability to interact with virtual objects in a real environment using real physics was a game changer in a lot of ways, is, kind of opening up the idea, especially in the realm of education. You didn't have to suspend your disbelief so much. You could actually see how things were operating. But yeah, it's been a minute since some of us have been working in this area.
A journey for sure. Those Google glasses, I love them, and I would wear them at school, and the cards would pop up in your vision, but it never really turned into something that we could use in school. Whereas companies took that on board, and they've continued to be used in companies. But then later, there were the Quest headsets. One of the things that I love now about my Apple Vision Pro is that little knob where, yes, I can be interacting with the world around me and I can see the room. It's augmented reality, but then I spin this little knob on the top right and it all goes away and I'm in a completely virtual world. But I think that device right now is sort of out of reach for many in the field of education because of the cost, and it seems to be much more of an industry product. Whereas the other devices from Google and Meta, they've been used in school. We have some at AIS. I had some in schools before. How have you seen those kinds of devices used?
Yeah, I think you're right. Being early adopters and trying to use glass in classrooms. Price point, I think, was more of the, I guess, barrier than actual functionality. You can't get people playing with things and they're not creating things, right, that they could use. But yeah, I think when the price went down, so I'm also thinking of Oculus, when it was Oculus before it became Meta, just even getting you know, the actual, I guess, biological effects of being in a virtual world. I remember being really nauseous in the Oculus, Rift. And I also remember having, the whole room setups. So now there's been a few factors that have helped put it in the hands of teachers, in the hands of students. It's become a lot easier. You literally take it out of the box, you put it on, and it's if you have a Facebook account or something, you can set it up. It's not very difficult. So it's no longer setting up, different beams or poles. Remember the poles that you had to fit around the room? Uh, um, I don't remember. There's like another box thing that would kind of capture between the poles and the wires. It was like a trip hazard. So it was really, really difficult. So now it's wearable. Everything is in the headset. And that costs, shrinking the cost by a factor of about 10 to $200. I think they're getting up now to about 300 for the larger. Yeah, so Meta, the Quest, I guess Meta buying Oculus and kind of, putting more engineering into it or more money towards the engineering to kind of bring the cost down, I think was a big effect in enabling people to get it to use in classrooms. But still we have that barrier, right? It's cool. But once everybody gets into it and it's cool, I did X, Y, and Z, there's only so much you can do with the gee whiz factor. It now becomes, uh, how do we change or how do we, you've got the right word, but what are the outcomes, learning outcomes that we can tie to or tie back to the technology? And it's something that every piece of ed tech struggles with, from, smart boards all the way down to iPads. Everyone wants to know what is the effect of using these technologies on actual learning outcomes. And I think we still have a ways to go. And I think it's not because of lack of the ability to do it. It's really lack of data. We don't have enough people using the devices in ways that are measurable to get to these tangible outcomes. So I think it's there, but we as educators have to do a little bit more work in, I guess, structuring I guess, for lack of a better word, the experiment so that we can get really good data to show the effects of learning.
I mean, the
Learning outcomes.
potential seems really positive, really big. Like, what are some of the ways that you think we should be thinking about spatial computing and VR in the future? Obviously, things like taking trips to places that you can't go easily and having those experiences either in past or in the future. That's one way in which
Yeah.
this could be used. But what are some other ways that you see it could be impactful?
Yeah, I think those are kind of the low-lying fruit, right? I remember when glass came out, it was taking people to the collider in Switzerland or whatever it was.
And seeing the
Uh,
pyramids.
yeah, and seeing the pyramids. But I think that's really not that much different. Maybe one deviation over to showing a video, right? I think the real effect of spatial computing is going to hit when we start looking at the relationships that people can have and the stories that people can be a part of. The immersive part, I think, is where the magic is. how immersed, how do you feel that you're in the place of filling the blank, or you feel what it feels like to be, I don't know, in Egypt looking at the pyramids. Um, and when you can have that realistic feeling and you come away with the same emotional, I guess, effects that you would have if you were there, I think that's the magic. And I think we're getting really, really close when, we both had all the sets. We've done all the things. I think the only one I haven't had is the Magic Leap. I haven't tried that one. But with Apple Vision Pro, I think they've erased that almost, not quite. I'd say they're 75% of the way there. That feeling of being in the room with the person, the feeling of being truly transported to the experience. And it has a lot to do with their storytelling techniques and the equipment that they're using to create these immersive experiences. I think it's kind of getting into, just creating truly immersive experiences that are kind of breaking that barrier between making you feel something. And I think that's what the magic is going to be. And I really feel like we're at like 75%. I think I
We're
keep
on the
going down.
cusp.
Like we're on the cusp of it.
The other day, when you and I were in a virtual space together with our Apple personas, and I could see that you were looking at me. Like I could see
Hmm.
your face would turn one direction or another, but you were looking at me and I was looking at you, and I can see your facial
Hmm.
expressions virtually, but it's not a video. It's actually our personas. So I think there is something that is truly real that's starting to happen when
Yes.
people are
Yeah.
in virtual spaces together. The other thing that I find that's unique, maybe in the last year or so, that I had not experienced before, is the ability to, in the space, see and rotate and do something to a third object together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's coming along. That is coming along. But I think you're right. I think more than the object, because Microsoft has had that for a while with the HoloLens. But I think the avatars for me have a really important part of that. The realistic looking at Joe, not Joe's avatar, right? And I think we're making that when I'm looking at and of course, I mean, we've seen the improvement from version 1 to version 2. I think it's much, much better. And I feel that Apple's decision to go with the realistic rendering and really putting the energy and effort into engineering that avatar that looks like you as a person, I think has made it much, much, much more tangible. I mean, I've seen you've used your avatar in Zooms with other people. I haven't quite yet done that. I'm more vain. I'm going to have to scan myself every day, right? To
Yeah.
get the
Your
avatar to
clothes
look
and
like me, everything the same. But yeah, I think, the last meeting we were in, nobody mentioned and I was looking for that, right? Because that's what I do. So
it's
I'm
quite
looking for,
compelling.
yeah, how people are interacting with you, how basically are they. Um, but nobody said anything. They just kind of, I mean, they might have thought you were using a backdrop. I haven't asked anybody because I knew the secret, you know. But I think more and more of that, and maybe as that technology builds out, where they're, completing you more, where it doesn't seem kind of see-through sometimes. So we know what to look for because we've been working with this for a while. A lot of other people don't know what to look for. So I'm sure the three people on the call had no idea what they were looking at. Then I also think about people who have complained about people using avatars. And I think it goes back to that, for lack of a better word, just being haters, right? Because I remember with Google Glass, people were complaining about it. And I was thinking, why, this is such a dumb thing to complain about. But it was, this kind of have versus have not kind of thing. And I think if we can work through that with Apple, and Apple's a pretty strong company. I don't say they don't care, but it's not going to stop them from keeping on developing. And if we can work through that and make it even more real, I remember talking to somebody about that meeting that we had. And as I walked around the room, or as you were walking around the room, your avatar, it was a disembodied head, and which is disconcerting. But anyway, it also kind of moved. So, there's a lot of promise that if we can just get that together, for me, that's number one. Number two is being able to share the objects and, kind of co-create things in real time. Being able to know that we're looking at the same thing as though we were in a boardroom together. That's also really powerful. So there's a lot of things that I think are just really setting this up to be successful. Like we've finally gotten to the point where we can now be successful at having courses online or having, people meet in spaces and things like that.
Agree. For me, these last weeks in the Apple Vision Pro have been the most compelling educational technology or technology that I've used in a long time that I've been introduced to. And I would say there is that piece, like what we do together, whether it's work or learning, is relational. And so
Yes.
to be able to be in different spaces physically, but the same space virtually and still have emotional connections because it's realistic, that matters. And then, as you stated, we need to be able to co-create together in the virtual space. And that ability to be able to rotate something or move around it and look at it physically from different perspectives, that physics that's now coming along, I think in terms of our thinking and for STEM education, I think that's really important. The storytelling, to be able to experience things and to communicate and be compelling is important. But I will say, to sort of finish this, what's compelling about it to me, the last thing I would state is it has really helped my ability to focus, especially on long form content, whether that be text or otherwise, because I can remove the distractions and I am in this space where I can engage with it and do things. But long form technical reading, I'm able to spend much more time doing that now without being distracted or interrupted because I'm in the virtual space. It's really been helpful for me.
Yeah, I think that there is probably something, I haven't read the research or anything, but how it helps you to get into that flow state. And it's really weird that we're replicating pre-technology rhythms and flow with technology, right? Because before, when we didn't have, scrolling through Reddit or Instagram or TikTok, whatever people are doing, or, we didn't have all these distractions, these tech distractions, we could hit that flow state, stay in flow. And now we're reverting to having to use high tech because, this device is like $3,500 to reach this pre-technology flow. Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I think going back to the original point, there's a lot of promise. It's very compelling. Its application for K-12 learning, there's still a lot of pilots and research that need to be done to explore it. And I think we're on the cusp of doing more of that kind of work. Sort of transitioning a bit, one of the things that you and I have discussed in the recent months is there are university labs now that are developing to help train students in using the tools necessary to record and create content and code for these devices. So we have the Full Sail University. I want to say there's probably a couple of $100,000 worth of equipment in that lab.
Yeah.
Purdue University. So it's this Blackmagic Ursula immersive camera that they're getting, which is a really new camera built for immersive content. What do you think about what's happening in these universities with building out these spatial computing labs? Is it the way of the future?
I think it's, again, kind of going back to this whole how the past informs how we operate. It's a really good example of looking at building something from the ground up and building something to be purposeful. And also, it's a really great way of thinking about education, kind of the philosophy of building around purpose. So if you think about it, most courses or traditional ways of teaching and learning, you have a set of facts, and then you're going to impart this knowledge that people will then take, and they might write an essay or something to put their spin on it. But now with immersive storytelling, they've built a program where they're giving students the tools to create something and to interpret and to make meaning out of whatever the prompts are, and then pass that meaning on to or share that meaning with others. And so I think that's really compelling, a really compelling mode. They always say, you need to walk a mile in someone's shoes in order to understand their predicament. And we've seen it where people or students who have to engage in a very deep way on a topic, they come out the other end with a really, you know, I'd say transitional or transformational understanding of the people and the events and, the subject as a whole. They can speak really credibly and deeply about it. So creating immersive content requires you to do the same thing, right? You need to understand the information that you're going to impart, but you also have to understand the feelings and how to convey those feelings and convey the really you're transporting someone somewhere visually, but again, going back on that psychological and emotional part of it as well. And for a university to think so holistically about the learning is wonderful. Now, I wish I think the camera that they use was like 30,000. Just the camera is
35, yeah.
$35,000. That kind of puts it out of the reach of pretty much
Most
everybody, unless you have a really nice,
generous donor.
generous benefactor. I think beyond donor, because 35K is a lot for a camera, right? But so again, it goes down to not impossible though. Okay, that's, to make it Apple Vision, 4K each eye or 8K, whatever. But you can get very similar with, there's 180 cameras. There's still going to set you back maybe, 5 to 10,000, but it's becoming more and more useful. There's even smaller, well, it used to be 50. Now they're like $100 cameras that you can use to create some 360. So there's scaffolding
Yes.
that's involved in doing this, but I like the idea of building a program around being able to tell stories that really immerse a person.
I cannot tell you how many times in the last month I have sat in my living room in the evening and I am experiencing a story or a location, some kind of experience. And I'm surprised that my neighbors cannot hear me going, wow, wow, wow. It's really, the emotions that you feel, it's different. It's very, very different. And so I think you're right. It is largely out of reach to do that. So there's monoscopic video and then there's the stereoscopic, and it's the stereoscopic cameras that are really expensive. You can do it with a Canon R5 with the dual fisheye lenses for cheaper.
I have one of those. And to be honest, we have the luxury or the curse of seeing all, because it's both, right? When you don't know what you don't know. So we have experienced the full immersive, Apple story. You're on the tightrope, you're on the whatever, you're at the Alicia Keys concert, you're at the, and the person's right. But the 180 cameras can give you,
Absolutely
80% of the way there, right? And so I think that it's not so much, and sometimes the gift of not having everything is really important here. Figuring out how to do it is a good challenge to have, and it can be done. It really can be done. And the technology is going to go down. It might take a minute, but it will go down.
For me, the 180 stereoscopic is better than the 360 monoscopic. So even like the new Insta X5 that I've been using to record some video, it's monoscopic and I'm using it in 180 instead of 360. It's still very compelling and it lets you experience it. It's not the same as the stereoscopic, but I think getting students creating experiences with that is a great place to start to help them see how to tell a story in a way that is immersive. And I think that's where we can begin.
I also think that we don't have to stick to one modality. Sure, we have limitations on creating or a full using that 35,000 on a camera. But we have AI, we have virtual reality
Yeah,
engines that are
Unity. Yeah.
creating and Unreal that are creating realistic 360 environments that can simulate some of that, and I think also being realistic, being modest with our intentions. So no, we don't have $1 billion budget, so we can't create XYZ, but we might have a $5,000 budget or a $2,000 budget. Unreal Engine and Unity are both free for everybody unless you're making above, I think, 500,000 on your product. So kind of putting some energy into the ecosystem around the product and not focusing just on the product itself or how somebody has done that will do us really well. And if you've gone to or seen um, 180 content, it's really, really compelling, really, really compelling. And I was thinking, most of the time, if you're imagine you're at the opera or at a concert, you're not looking behind you, you're looking in this 180-ness is the natural uh, posture. You're not doing anything, and if you have, we've done projects where you have multiple people in a simulation, or you have multiple people doing different simulations but in the same area. You can't do this walking around thing because they're gonna, kill each other. But they need to be seated, so how we craft the experience is also important. So if you think about it, students going through this, they're learning so many disciplines. They're learning the storyboarding, they're learning storytelling, they're learning user experience design, because you're designing the experience that a person's going to have. Um, you're not thinking, it's easy to think that, the people at Meta or Apple or Microsoft, they just say, okay, I'm going to create this and people are going to sit down and do it. No, they don't do that. They really think about crafting what I want Joe to feel, what I want him to see, and what I want him to do after the experience. And I think teaching students that, you're not just drawing a picture on paper or turning it in, your teacher's going to give you an A based on some criteria. No, they're crafting experiences for people to go through. I think that'll be a change in how we learners.
I think you're spot on with this. It's this sort of intersection between how we communicate, what
Hmm.
impact it has, and then
Hmm.
where does the technology fit into making that happen, and choosing the right technology and processes. I think with these labs that are being developed in higher ed, we can look to them and sort of
Hmm.
see what kind of skills. Because I do think they are thinking about what technical skills and what kind of thinking and processing are students going to need to use for their future, and we can kind of do the step to get them there
Yeah.
in terms of what technology that we can afford and what processes we can use. I think it's a good way to start is to kind of look and see where we can make some steps in this area around immersive learning eventually, but right now getting students to create some immersive experiences.
I think that for me, it's more about getting students to think in the right way, because I think the technology is changing so quickly. I think the way that we think isn't changing that quickly, being critical thinkers, etc., being able to good problem solving, that's not going to change. How we do things technically will change. And maybe who knows how quickly. The adoption curve on these devices is still not exact. I think I want to say it's almost flat. I don't think it's particularly picking up. But the good news, I think, in that case is that we have a lot of people who have deep pockets and deeper intelligence and knowledge, kind of stick-to-itiveness, who are behind the products and are going to just wait it out to see what happens. I don't think the killer app has happened yet as far as, so I don't know the tech part of it. Having them, at least what we could do with kids is making sure that they're open to learning about technology and open to trying new things and taking the right risks, things like that. But I don't know about, and of course, computational thinking, I don't think that's going away, but just being open to the possibilities, because I don't know, none of us know what they will create in the future, but having them have that mindset to create something is going to be important. So it's more a way of thinking, not the ways of doing to
I think
me.
that's a great segue into a new topic here.
Mm,
Where where do you see these immersive experience products? So right now, Apple Vision Pro, your Meta glasses, even the
mm,
Oculus Quest products in the workplace.
mm,
Like our students now, they graduate, they go to university, some don't, some become entrepreneurs. But 10 years from now, 15 years from now, where do you see these? I guess now, even, I think we're seeing
mm,
them in the workplace. I'll give you an example. We were at Apple headquarters in Cupertino not too long ago, and we saw some medical doctors that were all in these headsets and they were being trained on how to use them. I think the medical
mm.
field is starting to see this impact. Mechanics, airlines, car manufacturers, we're starting to see it. But where do you see that going?
I think it can go, I think I have a positive answer and a negative answer, I'd say. I think using the technology to enhance learning, to enhance vision, to enhance reach. I'm thinking of like telemeds. You might be doing an operation, which they're doing. They have been doing for a while. You're in Istanbul and you're operating on somebody in Denver. That's been happening for a little while. But maybe democratizing that would be nice, so more people have the access, more people can kind of augment their individual impact. I think that's really good. Negative is, I think, a lot of the kind of outsourcing the relationships. So I think that just like we went through a phase, I don't know if it's still, probably still going on, so maybe it's not a phase, you know, people meeting people in real life versus meeting people online. I think there's been a swing now to, I think meeting people in real life is now a thing. So I hope it doesn't go to, we're doing too much in the virtual, and not enough in the real. So for me, that's a big fear, especially as the world gets more complicated and people have more social emotional challenges and things like that. So I'm wondering that community, creating and maintaining community, and also not making everything so transactional. So it kind of feels more transactional when you're just in a headset operating something on somebody from afar. You don't have the connection. So I think I'm speaking out. For me, I feel like I'm speaking out both sides, right? So on one side, all the advances and making it more real is great, but everyone doesn't have this ultra realistic. It's, usually it's a cartoon avatar in a very cartoony virtual world. So I don't know. I feel like I don't want us to lose the real aspect of the world. And I think that for me is, or feel that I just was on a call earlier with CIOs and one of everybody's talking about AI and kind of like not replacing people, but AI FTEs. Like at some point is AI going to become a FTE or a full-time employee, some kind of designation for, and I was saw another article where this one company was celebrating that their robot workers had done, I don't know, a year of work in an automotive plant or something. I don't know the full story, but, and they was talking about it like they were retiring or they had, work scars on their, hands and everything. And just this idea that we're still kind of struggling with the replacing of the human and not the augmenting of the human, which I'm in the augmenting of the human category, not the replacing of the human category. So yeah, so that I think we have kind of I almost forgot your question, but I think we have a ways in industry to kind of normalize and it's still kind of new, right? I mean, at least this intelligent form or this, more intelligent feeling, more sophisticated, whether it's AI or VR, spatial computing or whatever, we're still kind of developing our relationship with this new technology. So it'd be interesting. I think in 4 years' time, we might be having a different conversation, but right now, that's where we are.
It has changed, I think, in the last couple of years with the introduction of the meta glasses and such.
Mm-hmm.
That's becoming a little bit more normal, but actually wearing a headset that kind of blocks your face isn't normal yet. But back to your point, I think the ideal is that the technology becomes so realistic in the virtual world and that it's more augmented versus completely virtual, that it helps build relationships instead of hinder relationships, right?
Right.
That's the goal. Whether that happens or not, we can't really predict.
Yeah.
And I think there's all these different aspects. There's using it in the workplace. There's
Mm-hmm.
using it for learning, and then there's using it at home. I think there are tons of people right now that are, they're gaming online and
Yeah.
they're using Twitch and they have their headsets on and they're using it. Whether they're establishing relationships through that or not, I don't know.
I still think, though, that we haven't found, like, look, I'm thinking about the glasses, like I have these glasses, and um, why do I have these glasses? I think that's the question that needs to be answered. Like, why do you want to have, what is the purpose? How is it helping you do something? And I think most people haven't come to that yet. It's not changing their lives so much that we both have. So, I mean, for me, I don't want to go back from the Vision Pro. Use them every day, spend hours in them every day. I feel like a Vision Pro evangelist. I'm, you know, converting people one person at a time to using the pros, and everyone that I have spoken to or introduced it to, everybody really loves them because from a individual productivity standpoint, I think it's gold, right?
It's different.
But
It's different for sure.
yeah. So I think we found our killer app and the reason why we keep going back to it. But then again, we're privileged enough to be able to do that. But then again, when I had the Meta Quest, I had my virtual office and I did a very similar thing. It was more glitchy. Um, um,
It was not as
yeah,
compelling. I loved
exactly.
it. I
Yeah,
loved
yeah,
it. And I will say,
exactly.
the controllers were part of it.
Hmm.
And sometimes now with my Apple Vision Pro, I'll give you an example. I have been trying out the new fishing app in the Apple Vision Pro where you don't have the haptic feedback that you do
Hmm.
with. So there's benefits to both, either having it or not. But I will say one of the most compelling parts of the Apple Vision Pro is the interaction with your hands and your fingers,
Yes.
right? And not having to have those controllers. At the same time, I love this new Logitech Muse. I am in love with using it actually a lot. But I think you're right. As a society, as a culture, we don't yet know the why. I think, and I have to segment it. Some of it's for, you know, things that I want to experience, entertainment, right? And that
Hmm.
part, I get why. Some of it's for learning for me personally. That part I get why, but then segmenting some of it's for productivity for that part, it makes sense to me. But most people, that's not the case yet, right? It's going to take a while to get there. But I do think that there in industry and in business, there are companies that are trying it and they are figuring out that it
Yeah.
is helpful.
Yeah, I think it'll be
It's
more
happening.
helpful when it's not $3,500. I mean, so I think that's the thing. So getting the price down again and being able to kind of democratize the experience. But will I give mine up? Nope. I'm very
Not,
happy.
no.
I'm very happy with mine. I think another point that you brought up that we also are from an era where we didn't have these. So we know how to socialize. We know how to, do all these things. So my fear sometimes with how we introduce it to younger audiences is that it's not an escape. It's a tool, and it's used as a tool, but they don't kind of retreat into this virtual world where we saw this with just straight computers, right? People do this with just the screen or the phones. So I think kind of balancing that is something, just getting into um, a new psychological paradigm, new ethical considerations is something that we have to grapple with. And I think we haven't kept up as quickly with the psychological downsides of it.
We experience this, with the other technological
Mm-hmm.
revolutions. I think when I think back to my family and televisions and like VCRs and phones, whenever
Mm-hmm.
we got a wireless phone in the house, and then I had a wireless, I had a phone in my room, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, things changed. And we experienced it, with computers. I was thinking a few minutes ago when we were talking about these labs that universities are now developing. When
Mm-hmm.
I first went to university or to college, I was one of the very few that had my own personal computer in
Mm-hmm.
my dorm room. But most of us, and even I did still for many research things, we went to a computer lab, to
Yeah,
write
I
our
remember
papers
that.
and do things.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's happening right now with spatial computing and virtual
Right.
reality is these labs are being set up because it's not
Mm-hmm.
democratized. Everybody
Right.
doesn't have it. And I think we will eventually, it will happen. And I think the key is, and I'm always careful not to talk about things in balance. The word balance, I'm very careful to use it. I
Mm.
think it is bracing it in such a way that students and children, when they are using it and when it's appropriate to use it, realize that you use it for connection with other humans, not to hinder connections, but it is something that can
Yeah.
help build connections. And you must approach it that way and with purpose and intentionality.
Yeah. And I think that's our responsibility, right? Because that's not naturally how it's being.
Sold.
Yeah, I don't think it's being marketed that way. Sometimes you think it is. Like I'm thinking back on different commercials and it's always about, seeing pictures of your family but then the real uses, the real productivity usage is individual or playing games together or. So yeah, so I think that there's a nice kind of middle ground, but I think it's about education as well and what's being developed for it and how it's being developed and then just how we talk about it and how we train the younger generation.
Yeah, how we introduce it and how we talk with them, how we build
Yeah,
relationships with them through the
yeah,
technology and introducing it. That's all important
yeah. 'Cause I don't think we did a really great job. Yeah, we
with the
haven't really done
individual
that great job.
devices.
Well, no, as we go through, you talked about growing up with, getting the computer and then getting the cordless and
Cell
phones and whatever.
phone,
Yeah, and I'm thinking that we it wasn't like, oh, you're going to share the cell phone with your sister. It was, this is your cell phone, right? Or you're going to, so the more we've been developing more and more individualized things and not as much community things. So I think that the why we're building it, you can have a experience with many people, but you have to think about it. Same thing with AI. Why am I using it? Is it better to be in the virtual world, or is this something I could do in real life? And then kind of making the distinctions.
this idea of personalization that has been happening across technological
Hmm.
advances, but in many other areas as well. If we're not careful, it leads to loneliness, right? And
Yes.
how
Yeah.
do we ensure that personalization leads to connectedness instead of loneliness is a real key, I think, a topic that humanity needs to keep in mind. Yeah, it's a good
I
point.
mean, we're seeing those effects right now, right? So there's this whole, and this is the fodder for 20 million other podcasts, this whole loneliness epidemic that's happening. And can you track it to the access to having your whole world in your pocket and
Social
not
media.
having to reach out to people in real lives? So I think as we develop this spatial, if we're thinking about telling stories, involving people, then I think we could kind of buck that trend. But if we are continuing as we have been, and one thing I think that, think about who's creating these devices. And there is an area where we can start looking at, involving more people in the development so that someone could say, okay, hey, are we making this inclusive or community based, or is this, erring on the side of, or, being more skewed to individual use, individual satisfying kind of, I want to say selfish is a strong word, but selfish versus you know, looking out for the community and balancing that, although you don't like the word balance, but balancing that, I think would be important
Key.
to
Yes,
stem
key.
this loneliness idea.
Well, let's wrap up here. I'm wondering, on a broad level, when you think about K-12 education, schools, leaders, teachers, parents, what are one or two key takeaways that you think would be important in regards to spatial computing and virtual reality to keep in mind? What are takeaways from your perspective?
I think my first takeaway is going to be have a role in it. I don't think educators should cede this responsibility to people who are not educators. So I think have a role in the development of products and the development of experiences that you're going to allow your students to and then the second part is everybody is kind of, I call it the ratatouille effect. Everybody can produce everything now. I mean, you can have a role in actually not only finding material, but producing material, having your students start learning how to be creative and collaborative in this space and contributors in this space, not just consumers. And we talk about this a lot, but I don't know how much we're actually doing in that area. I think the responsibility there is on schools and having the right partnerships and finding the right I guess, collaborators to make your students have more of a voice.
Great, great takeaways. Well, with that, this has been a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Yep.
Thanks for your
This was
time
fun.
today. Yep. Take care.
Bye.